So thank you so much, guys, for joining me, and it's lovely to see you all. Actually, obviously, Tim, you joined me last month, and Sam and Liz, you guys are newcomers, but Liz, we've done some chats previously to this. Um, so what we went with last time was this is just like a really open space to discuss anything. But ultimately, it's to help promote each other, to discuss maybe if there's other works we should be sharing, ideas. Like it's really, you know, more than just a reading group or like how to do something. It's meant to be about supporting each other, which is what essentially for me, AgStacker is all about. So if anybody has anything they want to promote or anything they're doing or any skills they think that they'd like to share, any stories, I'm always really open to get started with something.
Say is that let's hear some stories. That's what we started with last week. Some people who maybe known peripherally or just a little bit from a post, but Liz and Sam are new here, and I'd love to hear some of your tales.
Kind of who are what you're doing at the moment, because obviously this is also recorded, so it would be great for other people who are not familiar with your platforms. Um, but also we went into a little bit of what we're trying to achieve, I guess. Cody with us last time was talking about his struggles with going from a conventional Midwest farming system to something that's completely regenerative. So we were talking about the different hurdles there, and yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, I'm Samantha Burns. I am a farmer and homesteader in Maine. I'm not really one or the other at this point. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. My farm is called the Runamuck Acres Conservation Farm, and we are raising sheep and vegetables. I'm no longer doing chickens because I just don't like them. And the main reason we have sheep, I get asked this a lot. So the main reason we have sheep is not necessarily for meat or fiber. It is our conservation effort. I am regenerating or rehabilitating a 10-acre pasture, improving soil and plant life for beneficial insects and other wildlife in my neighborhood. That being said, I do take a harvest from my sheep, and I am feeding not only my family, but some other households in my community. And I guess what I'm trying to achieve at Substack in particular is just sharing the knowledge that I've gained over, my own 30-year journey in agriculture to help other people get started, especially in these turbulent times that we are facing today.
Sam, I'm a huge fan of all of that. Thank you. Thank you for all you're
My
doing and
pleasure.
for writing about it in the way that you do because it's so approachable.
Thank
Super
you.
approachable. Yeah. So, Helen, I'll go. Liz Reitzig here, Raw Milk Mama. And as my publication name suggests, I am an advocate for clean, safe raw milk. I have been working on this issue in particular, but much more broadly, food access issues for the past like 22 plus years now. Oh my gosh. Like, and most importantly, I think that what I would describe myself as is a person who works on the consumer advocacy side of food access issue, but stands with farmers. I help grow small farms through working with them on marketing and messaging, or when they encounter regulatory or compliance issues, standing with them through that whole entire process and coming to a good resolution. So, a farmer advocate, I'm certified in permaculture design. I do it on a small scale. I don't feed anybody outside of my family with those efforts. And I have a very small access to land, so I don't anticipate that becoming a thing here, growing for other people. That being said, I do help grow small farms. I help them transition to more regenerative style farming or grow their market, grow their audience, or as I said before, face the regulatory issues that so many of our farmers face on an ongoing basis. And so they don't have to be alone doing that and kind of have a good outcome.
Yeah, and I know, Liz, you bucked up against raw milk in Wisconsin, I believe it was, and you had a battle to get through that. And I know I've talked with Sam about Maine's amendment to their constitution, the right to food amendment. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of, and I know even Helen has incredible story about, you know, her struggle and what she went through as well. So we're all, you know, I'm not a farmer, but we're all there for you and facing, you know, what you have to face on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's really scary at the moment how many farmers are facing legal battles just to produce food. Like in the UK, headlines this week, obviously, I don't know if you saw me post on my Substack, but there are farmers in high court against, please excuse the fireworks. There are farmers in high court facing they're trying to challenge our government, and I admire them so much because it's such a difficult process to go through, and the fact that this case is even being heard is a little bit kind of shocking to me, because at the end of the day our high court is a little bit like an extension of our government. It's, you know, it's the same system that all comes together, yet farmers are challenging it and it's being heard. But I just don't have this feeling that it's going to succeed, you know. And from my own personal battles of being in high court myself, like I know that things just don't come around like you'd like them to. But it is honestly terrifying to see how many people are being in different legal situations, you know, across the globe. The more I talk about it, the more I see it, the more I hear from people who are going through different battles.
Yeah, Alan, it's overwhelming.
So yeah, it's, anyway, maybe on a more positive note, it's so amazing that one of the things that I love about this community that we've kind of tapped into on Substack is everybody's really supportive of each other. Whilst we have conversations that might differ in opinions, like we do it, we have those debates intellectually. There's no kind of what's the right word for it? There's no he said, she said. There's no pulling people out and this really kind of hate that we're also seeing a lot across the media, which is a joy. But at the same time, there's such a great wealth of knowledge from different areas globally. And, you know, I know personally that I learn so much from you guys, especially because as a British farmer, I have a very different, you know, perspective because I'm thinking about the UK. But actually, when I look at the bigger picture against the UK and the States, is we're actually going through the same battles, just different sides of the Atlantic.
Just going to say that I see a lot of correlations between the stories that Helen has been telling from the UK and the stuff that we've got going on over here. Of course, ours is seems to be exacerbated right now with our current administration, but I don't know, maybe it's not so exacerbated because then you've got your what is it, the Parliament over in the UK and your big tractor protests. So it seems like it's really a worldwide issue.
Yeah, I
And
definitely
adding to
agree.
that, yeah, what both of you said, I've been working on the policy side of things for so long, like in the court system and on the legislative side and on the administrative side, wherever on the state or federal level. And what I don't know, just distilling down like 25 years of geeking out on policy and how that translates to what's happening on the ground, literally. I see this as so much of an ideological shift, and that we're working so hard to shift that ideology someplace else, because we're talking about like the policies are impacted by the ideology, and the ideology is saying right now data centers are more important than farms. And we're saying, all kind of united, no, they're not. Like, and if y'all don't wake up before it's too late, like you're going to have data, but you're not going to have food. So how helpful is that going to be? So all of these things work together. Policy can help shift ideology. Ideology absolutely shifts policy. And all of it comes down to our ability to communicate these things in a way that resonates with the people whose minds need to change, or in our opinion, whose minds need to change. And you know what? I mean, on the one hand, like I'm so realist and all of that. And on the other hand, I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful because we keep saying things, because more and more people come into our way of thinking about this. Whereas one farmer friend of mine says, regenerative farming, you can join us now or you can join us later. Like it is inevitable. There's going to be suffering along the way. And I think all of us want to reduce that suffering, minimize it. But we know that that is going to happen because of the ideological shifts that have already occurred that we have to now live through.
Yeah, good points, Liz. And we came together. I came to this platform in the beginning with Liz and Adam Kunzig when we were looking for some sort of category to call ourselves. And thinking about the meeting this morning, stepping back a bit, and then thinking about my conversation with Sam about online about Maine's amendment, food amendment, it helped me to realize that until in our Constitution, an amendment is much less movable, right? You have to have an agreement of both sides, of whoever sides are working on that in order to change something. Whereas a law, if you pass a law, laws are under the whim of the present administration. So thinking along those lines, I thought about what is it that what is it that we're undergoing right now as a movement, you want to call it even, that what do we need? And it occurred to me that we're missing a taxonomy. And that word popped up in my head because I have a very strong interest in stone walls. And there was a professor from the University of Connecticut who decided to make a taxonomy of stone walls of New England. And it wasn't until he sort of codified some of that that we began to able to, number one, talk about those walls. Is this really a stone wall? Does it meet the definition for stone wall, et cetera? And then document, there's over 240,000 miles of stone wall in New England. That's from here to the moon. That's a lot of stone. But what that impressed upon me is that we really don't have a taxonomy to talk about us. We have permaculture, we have regenerative, and then Helen's wonderful article today just exposed more, organic farming. There are people in there who don't want to pay the 550 pounds a year to get that license, but they subscribe to it because to them it just makes sense. Other people, when they're standing in a food aisle and trying to pick out what I'm going to feed my family, if they see organic, that helps them. That cuts down on their time. So maybe something we can begin to talk about is what taxonomy unites us. What's the big overwhelming category, that umbrella that we all fall into as a hierarchy? And to me, the word stewardship is one of those words that I think we all fall under. And I just wanted to pop that idea into the discussion to maybe begin to think, why is taxonomy important? It's important because it unifies us. It also unites our message so that when we do attempt to make change, we're not a whole bunch of different factions. Here's the permaculturists who are not aligned completely. And Helen's point is we don't have to be aligned completely. I don't want to be a monotheistic group. Polytheism works because it's all under an umbrella of Mother Earth, however you want to define what good stewardship is. So just some of my thoughts that I throw out there to maybe get some further discussion and input, because I have no experience with large scale farming and the things that they go through, or permaculture, regenerative. I know a little bit about it, just enough to be dangerous, but I believe that a taxonomy of discussion, something we can talk about, is something that might be a way for us to make some inroads into this situation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Tim, actually. Because I guess what I'm trying to tackle in my organic piece is that two sides of the stone is like it's accessible, but it's not, but it's great for a customer, but it's how do we make it better? And I love the point that you touched on is that we all talk about, and I see a lot of writing on it as well, is there's regenerative, there's agroecology, there's organic, there's pasture fed, and what are all these labels? Like, what's the difference? And actually, a lot of them are basically the same, or have very similar principles with very, very fine details. So why can't we give ourselves a more broad term, like a grassroots movement or something, that then differentiates into your style of farming and kind of really preserve that? So that's a really interesting point, actually. I don't know, Sam or Liz, if you've got any thoughts.
Well, when I think about everything, Tim, that you're saying and Helen, what you added, the thing that keeps coming top of mind for me is this is about food security. And some people call food security food sovereignty. And so I don't care about the semantics between those two. I think we're talking about the same thing, which is human beings having access to healthy, safe food within an easy walking or biking distance of where they live and work. And that's what we're kind of, I think, I mean, when I see us all talking about these things and the policies that are being put out there, I think that's what it's about. Like, we want to go to bed at night. All of us, universally, I believe, want to go to bed at night knowing that we're going to have enough food for the next day, week, month, and that it's not going to be an emergency. Like, that food security on the pyramid of what is it, the basic necessity pyramid? I forget whose
hierarchy of needs. Yeah.
Hierarchy of needs. Yes. That's at the bottom. Like clean, safe food and clean drinking water are literally at the bottom of that hierarchy of needs. And all of these other languages, like the regenerative and permaculture and agroecology, all of that, it gets to the core of, we want to go to bed at night knowing we're going to have enough food to feed our families. We're not going to watch our loved ones starve. And whether we say food security or food sovereignty, but I think that it encompasses all of that and that really primal feeling of we need access to clean, safe food as human beings. Then, I want to layer on one little piece of that, which is cost. Free food versus valuable food. And there was a time in human history when all food was quote unquote free. It cost us time and energy. And we were ideally, but not always, in community producing food or harvesting food from the forests and the rivers and everything that produced it for us. And now we've reached this horrible division where food costs and good food costs so much money that it's inaccessible to some people. And then bad food still costs money, but has no value. And we're in this really sticky, icky, frankly, ridiculous time where these things are just hitting us and causing massive feelings of fear and insecurity, when what we want is that knowledge that we have access to clean, safe food.
And the removal of barriers to that access, and that's what those barriers are there intentionally by large corporations to magnify their profits. We all know that. We're not fans of big agriculture. I don't think anybody is.
Yeah. But Sam, you were going to say something when I started, so I really want to hear what your perspective is.
I was thinking along Tim's lines of codifying the movement and the necessity for it. I think like not only is it like ensuring food security, but it helps the consumer know that this food is indeed safe. Like, as far as the organic label goes, like, I personally grow organically, but I've never been able to afford to invest in the certification for my farm. It doesn't really make sense for such a small farm, we're not selling that much. But those kind of labels, that's what tells the people that it's not made with seed oils or high fructose corn syrup, theoretically speaking. So some kind of label is important. And it, like, as far as the food security goes, it's one thing to have access to food in general, but it's another thing to have access to food that isn't going to like poison us or make us sick.
By the way, Sam, I love your transparency on your Substack where you share your own personal journeys about food security and what it really looks like and how, even though you're a producer, what that looks like on the ground for your own family and your own food
Yeah,
security.
it's kind of messy, huh?
Well, and to Helen's point, like this is a structural failure that the people producing our food can't feed themselves without assistance. I mean, it's such a tragedy of the structure that we're all working to adjust.
It really is messed up. And that was the reason I started growing food in the first place, because I couldn't afford to buy good food for my kids. So I actually had acreage. I was blessed to have that, be in that position. And I've managed to maintain that somehow. Um, but yeah, I had to grow my own food in order to have something that was worth eating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really, like you say, it's a really blessed position to be in, but it's something that most people aren't going to have very soon because we're seeing so much development, so much land being eaten up. We've just had the land use uh, policy published this week, and already it's, looking at reducing farmland by, food producing farmland by like 9%, which is actually really high when you think that we're a really small island. And like you say, like it's wonderful to talk about these amazing labels, but they're not necessarily affordable for everybody. And actually, given our current geopolitics, I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, they're already warning us that, the Iran war is going to put food prices through the roof. But the problem is those food prices are not going through the roof because that's actually what the cost of food is happening to. It's just another inflation tool. Yes, oil prices and fuel prices and everything related to it is going up. But I guarantee you that the farmers who are supplying the supermarkets aren't going to see a penny more. They're going to see the inflation on all of their ingoings, all of their production, and they're not going to see a penny from this food cost rise. And that's the thing that breaks my heart is, yes, we're all struggling in this world at the moment. Yes, we're all feeling the pain, but it's so displaced. And that fight against supermarket cost rising makes it even harder for people like Sam and for me when I was producing pork, because people could go to the supermarket and they go, well, why would I buy your sausages when I can buy a £3 pack in the supermarket next door? And it's a completely different product at the end of the day. So that's where I think conversations like these and tools like what we've been developing, on Substack are so important, because not only is it helping other people to grow food and to navigate these really worrying times, but it's also showing consumers what we're fighting, showing them what's behind it, because supermarkets are so faceless. Like, you buy a product off the shelf and you can imagine that it's reared in a beautiful farm based on the label that's on it, but it's completely not. And you buy a beautiful product from a farmer's market that looks wonderful, but you don't hear the pain, the heartbreak, the debt, that everything that goes into that one product. It's like, it's completely polarizing.
Helen, maybe we want to talk a little bit about why the war is impacting and now and going to impact food prices dramatically.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think whilst I try to steer clear of it, I definitely think it's something that we have to touch. And I guess actually one of the best points to look at is that from the UK's perspective, we already import all of our energy. We don't produce anything ourselves. So that's where this collapse is starting, is fuel prices, oil, electricity, all of those prices are going up through the roof, and because we are importing it. Now, if you look at that from a food perspective, if we then let our food security fall off a cliff as well, we're going to end up in exactly the same position, but with food instead of energy. And I guess that doesn't really answer the question or talk about why we're facing these food rises. But it's almost for me like a warning signal. It's like, this is not just something that's maybe going to happen if we think about it, or if something drastic happens. It's like we're heading towards a food collapse at great speed, and people, consumers just don't realize it. And actually, I guess this is where, Tim, your perspective will be really interesting, because you're not a farmer, as you've said, but you know a lot of farmers. But you're not waking up, but you're very passionate about food and farming and these circumstances. And your perspective as not an outsider, but somebody that sits outside of the farming industry is always really, I don't know, I find you really balanced.
One of my hot buttons is large corporations, people in power, however, people with authority imposing their way of life and will and laws and regulations on people who are just trying to raise a family and live healthy. And it raises the hackles when we get locked into a system that we have fewer and fewer options to make choices that are good for our family. And living locally and growing locally and community, to me, is a way, and I mentioned this last week, it's an act of rebellion against that. And so that resonates with me, being a rebel, to do those things on a small scale, because if we try to attack this problem from a global perspective, we're going to fail, because we don't have the money, we don't have the organization or the authority. And also it sends a signal that, oh, wait, we got to watch out for these folks. To me, it's much more effective, although much slower, and very disheartening as I hear the conversations going on here that, this is not going to work. But to take the long view that these little acts of defiance that we do, even with our own families and among our own small group here, and increase our knowledge base and participate in others' lives by forums such as this, or writing and publishing, is much more, I think it's a more regenerative and sustainable model, in the long run. It aligns with those philosophies that we all hold so dear to our growing. I think that's the way we live a life that is going to matter, and it's going to matter to more people. And when you look at the number of people that you can affect on a daily basis, it really comes down to your grandchildren and your children and your wife and your husbands, or your partners. And a lot of what's going on in the world won't affect us until it becomes a macro economic problem. But what can we do in the meantime? Hopefully, and with hope, is to do things on a small scale to make our own lives more genuine and authentic and transparent, among our own, those we love.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Tim. And I love your comments about these growing food being a small act of rebellion. Like, it's one of my favorites. And I definitely repeat it quite regularly. So thank you for sharing that.
It's interesting. A few days ago, I was being interviewed by a farmer and herbalist in North Carolina, and he was talking about some of what he's seen in his state. And he was impacted really badly by the hurricane last year, 2 years ago. And he said that the enforcement, and I think we should come back to this at some point, Helen, this idea of enforcement. So there's so many meat regs that US farmers have to deal with in processing meat. And he was telling me that there are, and of course, raw milk, right? It's like literally like the lightning rod for enforcement. And there's so many immigrant communities, especially Mexican and Central American, South American communities, illegal where he lives. and they do all of their own processing and they make their own cheese, and that the enforcers don't touch them because they're like, oh, that's that. And it's almost to me like, I don't know. So here I am speculating a little bit, but it's almost like they're not there to enforce immigration policies. They're only there to enforce food processing policies. And so if there's layers of policies, it gets really quickly confusing and like quicksand for them. But it really intrigued me, and especially in context of what we're talking about here, which is anytime you're producing food, it's an act of rebellion. And how can these immigrants communities teach us what we've forgotten? Culturally, structurally, teach us what we've forgotten. We don't know. For the most part, Americans do not know how to process their own meats. And how can we look at both their knowledge base and their I want to say active humanity, not active defiance, but active humanity, because ultimately feeding ourselves is a totally normal, natural, peaceful human behavior that now has become codified as criminal in certain places at certain times by certain people, but not by other people. And just exploring what's going on there and how do we readjust our thinking, because ultimately this is a thinking, it's how we think about something. If we think that processing our own meat is so dangerous it has to be criminalized, that's a different thought process than processing our own meat is so normal and natural that of course we can all do it. So where can these things intersect for a reemergence and a real food renaissance? All right, so I'm going to leave that there for 1 second. All right. Now to your question, Helen, like the rising food prices. I love economics. I am not an economist. So I want to just preface this by saying I am not speaking from being fully informed on all the economic issues that go into this. I do see boots on the ground, what's going on with our farms, and I see what's going on with our food system from a pretty broad perspective. That being said, when our commodity farms, when the inputs skyrocket, which is what's happening with the fertilizer prices, because there's a massive shift in how much is accessible, prices will skyrocket. And there will just simply be some farms who don't get it in time, which will affect how much corn and soy they can grow, which will put a squeeze on the corn and soy prices, which goes to feed our animals, right? So this is like, I mean, it's hard to just tell people in one short sentence, because we have to go from this dot to this one, to this one, to this one. Are you still with me here? Right? And we have to connect all these dots, and people are like, but what if fertilizer prices have to do with the price of pork? And we lose people. But when you tell them like the fertilizer goes to grow the corn and the soy that gets fed to the pork, and if the corn and the soy can't grow, we're missing an entire subsidized crop of corn and soy. So the pigs can't grow, and the chickens and the beef. So then you have fewer, and it starts to get like so much. And we just have to check in like, hey, are you still with me? Are we connecting these dots together? Because that one price and that accessibility impacts everything. And it's a global issue right now because that fertilizer went everywhere. And we're talking about nitrogen. All right. So super quick. And you farmers, please add in and correct me on any of this. But to grow corn, to continually grow corn and grain on our fields need nitrogen. And that's what's being blocked at the Strait of Hormuz, is that nitrogen. So it's not getting to the farms and the fields that need it. That being said, if we go small scale and we all go back to going to the bathroom outside like we used to do for the entirety of human history, that wouldn't be so much of a problem, but it is because of how we've created our systems. Anyway, woo.
It's a lack of resilience. It comes down to concentration, monocropping, reliance on 5 companies to produce 85% of the beef that we eat. And when one thing goes, the house of cards tumbles very, very quickly. And what this movement, which I believe is a movement of some sorts, this underground movement that we are participating in, is trying to increase the resilience so that one thing such as this has a minimal effect locally. That is not the case now, is what's going on.
I think there is an underground movement going on. right? There's a resurgence in the home interest in homesteading. And I think maybe this issue with the fertilizers not being able to reach our commodity farms, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're having trouble getting fertilizers in, aren't we also going to have a hard time getting in our usual produce? Because like all of our produce at the supermarket comes from other countries. We don't produce that stuff in the States here. And I think the UK sources in a lot of their stuff too. Correct me if I'm wrong, Helen, but um, I would think that there's going to be a significant lack of stuff at the grocery store, and people are going to be forced to turn to their local farmers and, gardening for themselves.
You're so right there, Sam. And usually I would be like, that's a great asset to us. But I also know that the supermarkets will use it as an excuse to put prices up. And therefore, again, small farmers have got to compete against that price. And but flipping that on its head a little bit is an interesting thing that I worked on the other day for Farms Not Factories. It was a CSA, and they said their biggest issue isn't that they can't produce enough food to feed their entire community. It's marketing. It's how they get to their community, because they have an abundance of food and they can keep scaling up and keep growing and keep feeding more people, but how do they get that message out? So and I think it's a really interesting point, because we all push really hard as farmers to sell our produce, but it is a really difficult thing to do when you're balancing everything else.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Sam, I'm sure you do an amazing job, but naturally you're conservation based, so feeding your community isn't necessarily the first point of call, but you still got to make a living, right? You still got to make some money on your produce. And Liz, I know you're actually doing a marketing course for farmers at the moment. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, this was in conjunction with another organization, and I offered to put on a marketing workshop, which I've been doing for the past about 15 years, helping small farms really direct their marketing message. I have a 15-year background in PR and marketing also, so that helps to have those tools. But giving a workshop on how these small farms, this is really geared towards small farms. And Sam, your type of small farm too, but not commodity farms, right? And how they can reach their intended and perfect audience and customer base and keep it, and especially through shifts like the one we're about to go through. So yeah, that's for free because it's in conjunction with another organization. It's a 3-part series, 2 hours each of a Tuesday night for 3 weeks. And our entire community of AgStackers is invited to join. This is something that I would say if you're interested in, it's a commitment. It's not drop in for 15 minutes. It's a serious workshop that builds off each previous one. So if you plan to sign up for all of them and plan to be there, and then plan to utilize some of what you learn in the workshop.
I think that's really amazing because, like I say, from my perspective, I never had an issue with marketing, but that's because I have a background in it previously. But I sometimes forget that it's not everybody's bag. And actually, when you're juggling a farm, a family, everything that's going on as well, like it's actually really hard to get your head around sometimes, or take the time to do. But at the same time, maybe we should be pushing people to really step up with, as Tim calls it, the small act of rebellion. Like maybe we shouldn't be spinning this as food security or food insecurities coming, food shortages are coming because of the war. Maybe we should be spinning it as food shortages are coming because of the war. So put yourself out there now, because the local people need you. Like they need our farmers to feed them, because it's going to be hard. It's going to come. Like
people can't make the connection between food pricing and quality right now, and they think cheap food. At least I'm feeding my family, but they don't see the long term or the impact that can have with in the long term for their health. So.
Well, one of the things top of mind when you ask that question, Helen, is how much we were there for people during the COVID shutdowns. All of us, all the small farms, people switched over in droves. And of course, the restaurants were shut down, everything was shut down. So our small farms were there for people. And during that shutdown, the small farmers had to make some really big decisions. Do I buy in another, or do I save all my calves and raise them on farm? Do I buy in more calves? Do I quadruple the size of my chicken flock? Do I plant more? Like they had to make really big and really costly decisions based on customers saying, oh, yes, I love what you're doing. I'm going to stick with you. And so the sales graph for these small farms went something like this, up, 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 up. And then everything opened back up again and went, and so we're dealing with a culture and a structure where the people, and I'm going to generalize here, want the food from small farms when they want it, and then they're abandoning the small farms as soon as things look better. And that's not fair. It is across the board not fair. There's not a single small farmer who hasn't felt, that I've spoken to, who has not felt the impact of that, and many who have lost their farms because of it. So I think that that's a message and a story that needs to go front and center as we're dealing with this next crisis, because there will be another one after this, that guys, if you want a resilient food system, you have to be there when it's hard for you too. And, as one of the farms, I love this farm so much. Like one of the farmers says to me, he's like, all these Americans travel to Europe and go on and on and on about how great the food system is there. He goes, why don't you stay here and build that here? And so we're in a moment again where our small farms have been asked to sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice. And Sam, I'm sure you've got comments on that. I'd love to hear them. Like, you guys have to sacrifice your standard of living. You have to sacrifice your time away. You have to sacrifice whatever it is and your discomfort so that we can have the food we want. And I'm really generalizing here. So we can have the food we want when we want it, but then we're not going to give back. We're not even going to join a CSA and put $1,000 up front so you have some security. I mean, and that is the backwards thinking. And I really think, Helen, I think we need to start leading with some of these stories, because it really is going to take commitment from people who are hesitating on commitment. And I know this sounds harsh, but it's real talk. Our farmers have sacrificed everything and we've pushed them past the breaking point, so many of them. And those stories we absolutely have to tell in the context of this new crisis.
Yeah, before it happens, right? Before it's a crisis, this needs to, you need to put some skin in the game now to prepare for an inevitable situation.
Yeah. And I think that's why, Sam, I love your content so much, actually, is because when I look at farming influencers, they all go, yeah, no, my baby lamb died. It didn't survive lambing. That's the facts of farming. That's real life. But you've almost taken it even further than that, because yes, those are the facts of life, but they don't talk about the problems that we don't talk about openly, like having your car repossessed and the sacrifices we make, like I remember days, where me and Matt would go look at each other and go, who are we going to feed? We're going to feed our pigs, or we're going to feed ourselves? We're going to feed our pigs, and that was just because we had a really bad week of sales, and cash flow is so up and down. And as you say, Liz, we all felt the market boom in lockdown, and then it slowly tapered off, and then it was like 1 year it just was completely gone. Like there was nobody at the farmers markets, nobody at the events. It was gone. And because you're prepping based on what the previous year was like, you're losing week on week. And that's just such a hard cycle to break. And yeah, like I say, Sam, that's why I truly love your content, because it's so honest, and not just, you know, agri-influencer honest, which is what I call it. It's like real human honest.
No, I want to share that part of farming for people who have never experienced it, for people who, who might be in a position to be able to make decisions for us. This is the reality of it. There's a financial struggle, there's an emotional struggle, there's the physical struggle. And we can't just gloss over that and expect people to be able to comprehend all that goes into these decisions.
Yeah. And Helen, also yours. I mean, you're brutally honest. You guys lost your farm because of the lawsuit and the toll it took on your relationship and on your family. I mean, these are like, these are the real stories, but also what I love about both of you two is that you share those brutal honesties, but you also share that you love it so much you keep going. And this is a part of your soul. And for those, for those of us who have our hands in the dirt, it is a part of it. And like, I truly believe it's a part of all of our souls. We've just lost touch with it in some places and in some ways. But being able to tell those stories from both sides of this is the tragedy of it, but this is the passion of it is key. And you ladies both do it beautifully.
I so agree with that. I so agree with that. We're all meant to have our hands in the dirt. We're all programmed that way, but we've lost it somewhere. I mean, not farming anymore and not having access to, land that I can grow, and, that's just the stage in my life that I'm at the moment. Maybe I'll get back there one day, and I really hope, but God, do I miss it. Like, my heart bleeds for people who have never been able to have that access. But it's like you say, we talk about the privilege we have as producing food, but it's so hard. Like, it's so hard. I can't even begin to explain. And yet, I know that there are farmers out there that have having scenarios like Sam and mine, because they're completely normal, and so widely felt in our industry, but they don't talk about it, and that nobody knows.
So
Sorry,
one thing
Tim.
I'll add to that, Helen and Sam, is that every day, I see multiple stories about people who have quit corporate work and gone to some type of living off the land or getting more into growing and farming and less into this. And very rarely do I hear the stories that go the other way. Very rarely. And so, I mean, I think that needs to say something to the rest of us, that taking the cut and going into poverty and living, are we feeding the pigs or the family today? Like, living with those decisions is still a better quality of life than the other. And I didn't say standard of living, I said quality of life. So let's get that term for what it is, right?
And even the big farmers are under, they're not living the life of luxury there. They have problems just on a bigger and grander scale, and they would love to get out of it. They feel a yoke around their neck. They're tied to subsidies and everything else, and they can't see a way out other than to continue to keep doing what they've been doing for the last, 5, 10 years. And they're not happy about it, I'm sure. Am I right?
We have a glimpse into that from Adam's writing.
Hearing all the talk about it, and that we can quickly lose hope if we allow ourselves to do that. But we also need to remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing, and as you say, Helen, put our fingers in the dirt. And one platform is the AgStacker list. There's a few films out there that have been that I ran across of farmers in the Midwest who converted their farms over to regenerative after going the corporate route, and showing some success of that. And it would be a nice place to put, you know, as a collective group of folks, if we see things like that, to have a place to post them, or, you know, send them to Liz so she can put them up in the AgStacker and maybe create an old category of success stories, you know, and those who go from big to little, and those, and, you know, their story of yes, it was hard, but it worked, you know, those things, because that telling stories is, you know, there was a reason they did it around campfires years, you know, ages ago, because it preserved a continuity, and also gave a perspective that, yeah, things are crappy now. They've been crappy for millions of years, you know, come and gone, up and down, but the resilience of humanity, I think, ultimately wins. I have to believe that.
I think you're right. I think as much as we talk about the doom and gloom, like you still see small changes. Like I still hear from consumers who are like, I read what you've written. I completely didn't think of it that way. I'm never going to drink milk again because I now know that there's bova and all sorts of things. And those small little wins all add up massively. But just sparking off on your idea about sharing, it's almost like sharing resources, and maybe collectively as a group, we could put together like an AgStacker resources section. So you've got a directory so you can find all the different agricultural writers on Substack. We've got a community letter to share the writing that's going on every month, a discussion space for everybody. But then also, what about, you know, resources like Liz's marketing courses, like amazing. Because at the end of the day, like, doesn't we touched on this last time actually, Tim, is community doesn't necessarily mean what it used to. Like, it's not your physical neighbors, your local community. I think community can be like this one, like it's a group of like-minded people supporting each other internationally somewhere, you know.
Let me just make the observation that we started this with Liz and Adam and myself thinking we needed a big category, and I'm glad we didn't get it. Because what we have now, I think, is something more rich and undefined still, maybe, and yet, but I believe it has a potential to be more resilient, you know, along the lines of what we believe, you know, our philosophies of life, of growing and raising animals, food, etc.